Good evening and welcome to the Journey Home. My name is Marcus Grodi, your host for this weekly program, in which I have the great privilege of introducing to you men and women who, because of their great love for Christ, were brought home to the Catholic Church. Each of our guests has a different story because the Spirit leads us all a bit differently. But you can see the same fingerprints of God in our lives as you see how grace works. And our guest tonight, Helen Hitchcock, is former Anglican. She'll talk about her journey in a moment, but I want to remind you that you're a very important part of our program. So later in the program, we'll take phone calls and emails. So you can even start calling us now to get in line with those questions. 1-800-221-9460. Outside North America, you can call us at 205-271-2980. And you can send us an email at journeyhome@EWTN.com. Helen, welcome to the Journey Home.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Now, you are no stranger to EWTN. You're on the board. Yeah. That's right.
Right, yeah.
You've seen a lot of changes here, and you've been
Indeed,
a part of the leadership.
I have, yes. From the early days, it's quite a change.
But it's glad to finally have you on the Journey Home program.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And I want to mention right off the bat that two of the prongs of your involvement in the church involve women and liturgy, two key issues. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But just so the questioners, the phone callers know,
right.
Why don't you give them your website also, right off the bat, so if they want to check it out.
Oh, yeah. The website for Women for Faith and Family is wf-f.org, the three W's and then the wf-f. If you don't put the hyphen in, you get the World Fitness Foundation. So be sure you remember the hyphen. So, and Adoremus is ADOREMUS.org.
Okay, and you're the founder and president of the women's organization.
Right, that's right.
Also of Adoremus.
Well, I'm a co-founder of Adoremus and the editor of the Adoremus Bulletin.
Okay, well, I'm sure these topics will come up, but let's go all the way back. And I'll get out of the way. I'd like to invite you to give us a little summary of your spiritual background.
Well, it could be a real long one or a really short one. When I was a youngster, my family were very devout, believing Christians. I'm not one who came from a family who were not believers. And they were, in many ways, great guides, spiritual guides, models, taught me the faith. And in particular, my grandfather Hull, who was a minister, actually, who was led me in the right direction and was, to the extent that I had a spiritual mentor, he was it. I grew up in a small town in Kansas, actually several small towns when I was little because my father was a school superintendent. And we went to the Methodist Church usually because there's a Methodist church in every little Kansas town. But when I got older, I was aware of the fact that there was a real problem within the Protestant churches. Modernism had afflicted the Protestant churches earlier than it affected the Catholic Church. And we had long discussions in my family, which I listened to when I was little and sometimes participated in when I got older. And so the problem within churches of maintaining authentic faith and being faithful to God and you know, with an authentic Christian belief was something that was not strange to me.
And I remember part of your story that you had some influence both of the Plymouth Brethren, which have kind of an anti-view of organizations and structure.
Yeah, that's true. And
also Congregationalism, which is institutionalized autonomy. So, I mean, you have a little bit of that, your background.
Well, there is that. I think that the Plymouth Brethren people in my family were suspicious of all organized churches because, well, they had a lot of Protestant experience and almost every little group goes wrong someplace. So they thought, we better not have any church at all. So, and then the Congregationalists at that time, they're different now after some various unifications and so on. But at that time, I think my grandfather was a Congregationalist minister because he did not have to subscribe to theories and modernist kinds of Sunday school materials and so on. He could, as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord, and that's how he felt about his congregation. So he was very instrumental. I can still remember some of his sermons. When I come across a scripture passage, I remember a sermon that my grandfather gave on that. So that was all a very strong formation, and
carried on strong into high school, and
that's right. I didn't begin to have problems with my faith really until I got to college, when I encountered all kinds of new ideas. And that strained things. But one thing that I encountered too was that when I went to church in my college town, they weren't like they were in my little hometown, where you were getting the straight thing and biblical-based sermons and so on. They were using weasel words that might fool the old ladies, but meant something else. And if you tried to discuss with them what they really meant, they were very hard to pin down on anything. They didn't want to alienate anybody. So that was a problem too. So when I was in college, I actually stopped going to church because I saw no point in it.
Because your actual religious faith had changed, or because these weren't feeding you, they're just going to take you in a direction, so I'm not going to get polluted?
I think there might have been two things going on there, Marcus. I never really analyzed it before, but I think there might have been a little bit of each. For one thing, I was young when I went away to college, and I didn't want to be apart from my family and my family's traditions, and I certainly didn't want to be apart away from my faith. So in one sense, I didn't go to the churches because I didn't think they were doing the right thing by their congregations. The other thing, though, was I did encounter ideas that called the faith into question, and that posed a lot of problems too, because I wasn't that courageous in defending my faith. And when professors would suggest that this was ridiculous to believe this, and a person couldn't be a smart person and also be as credulous about the Christian faith as I was, I have to say that I might not have been as courageous as I should have been about that. And I also began to encounter ideas like existentialism that were very intriguing and appealing, other kinds of things like that. So I think that I was very confused. And
did you leave college with that confusion, or was it resolved before you were able to get away?
Thanks be to God, it was resolved before I left. But there were several crises when it was serious. And one reason, you know what pulled me through some of those really, really bad times, was that I thought, my parents love me. I can't do this to them. I can't, you know, to adopt this view or to do this action would be against everything that I was taught. And, you know, my grandpa gave me a New Testament one time, an amplified New Testament. You know the one that's got all the different translations in it?
Right. Five different words every time.
Exactly,
a big
right.
word,
Every verse has got several different translations. Well, he wrote in the front, underneath his signature, he wrote 2 Timothy 2:14 to 17. And that's the part where Paul is talking to Timothy about how to teach the faith. And in that particular part that my grandfather underlined for me, it says, remember what you have learned and from whom you have learned it. And it exhorted Timothy, me, to keep constant to the Bible, to remain firm in the faith. And that was the way.
You know, your expression of what held you true in obedience to that verse in 2 Timothy is a great expression of the mature filial fear, love of God, why we obey God. It's not just because I'm afraid I'm going to go to hell, but it's because I don't want to lose His love. I don't want to offend Him. I'm proud of God. I want him to be proud of me. It's a different expression, which we want.
It's not the kind of shivering, I'm fearful. You want to do this because this is what's right to do, and you want to please the person who's given you so much.
Yeah. Thank God you had that seed in you.
Well, thank God for my parents and my grandparents.
Yeah, praise God for that, for that seed. So you at least leave college with it. You hadn't lost your faith in the midst of it, though. Had you left college with any commitment to a denomination?
I had one thing that I began to find missing was a real sacramental life, the Eucharist. Now, in the Protestant churches I was brought up, we didn't celebrate it very often. It was once a quarter in the Methodist Church, and sometimes, thanks be to God, sometimes they now have it more frequently, I think, in some Protestant churches, which is good because it gets them closer.
Monthly, I think,
It gets them closer to the reality that it expresses. Protestants, of course, as you know, don't understand this in the same way that Catholics do. They don't see it as the gift, a personal gift of Jesus that is represented every single time a Mass is said, that the sacrifice he made is made again, represented over and over, the same sacrifice. We saw it, though, as a great and very deeply important symbol. And that was not enough, maybe, but even I remember as a child, and little children were allowed to go to communion in the churches that I belonged to. And so I had that experience of receiving, and the minister would say, as you're kneeling at the altar rail receiving communion, he would say, "This is the body of Christ which has been given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." That's not something you take lightly, even if somehow it's thought to be symbolic. When I realized that it was really real, that makes a lot of difference.
It's interesting how God guides us in different directions, and as I look back, your major in college had a part to play in your desire and movement towards the sacraments too, with the arts.
That's true. I majored in art history and with a focus in Northern Renaissance and late medieval. And also I took history courses in that field as well. Yeah. And I began to see this beautiful expression of love for God in the works of art that had been made in the past. I also saw what happened when extreme views believed that this was idolatry of a kind of a sort. And as you may know, the Puritans decided that that the Catholic Church was worshiping idols, and so they believed in their hearts that they were destroying idols when they smashed beautiful works of art that were dedicated to the glory of God and in praise of his faithful saints, and I felt bad about that, actually. I felt bad. I mean, I had Puritan ancestors myself, and I thought that they were noble, faithful people, but this was wrong.
Which is sad, because it left so many of those otherwise sincere Christians without any appreciation for art and even a tradition of art.
That's true.
In their whole denominational life.
Yeah, that's pretty much true. Although, of course, that would change too, and that's good. But I think that the church's great treasure of art and music is a precious, precious gift that we as Catholics have to give to the world, to draw them closer to the beauty that is the truth of Christ. Which
we'll get around to later, is also helped fed your desire in Adoremus for defending liturgy, but we won't jump too far ahead of ourselves. Okay. At this point in your journey, though, you're out of college and you're seeing a draw to the sacramental. Is that what brought you toward Anglicanism then?
That's right. I actually talked to my grandfather about that, and he gave me books to read, he gave me the early church fathers to read, and at that time he felt that one could find their way, I mean, that Anglicanism was a way that was good. So, but then that began collapsing in the throughout the 70s.
Yeah.
Very soon after I entered the church. At the same time I entered the church, not very long after that, it was almost simultaneous, I met my husband-to-be, who was teaching in, we were both living in New York City.
You say into the church, the Anglican church?
Yes, right,
yeah, right.
Yeah, the Grace Church in New York City.
Okay.
But at the same time I met my husband, who was Catholic. And we had very interesting discussions because his particular field of interest was the English Reformation and the reactions to the suppression of the Catholic faith there, the recusants and so on. So that was, we had a lot of interesting conversations. He knew more about my own church's background than I knew myself, which was fascinating. But so we had a lot in common. We shared almost everything in the Christian faith. Sacramental appreciation for the sacraments, most of the doctrine. There was one problem that I had, and that was with the Catholic claims to authority, the Pope. How could God give all this authority and power to one human man who's just like you and me? That was a sticking point.
Yeah. So you married a Catholic, a well-informed, in history Catholic, who God bless him, because the more I study the English Reformation, the more I have a hard time stomaching what happened in the Anglican Episcopal history, especially when I read about the martyrdom of St. John Fisher. I want to slug somebody.
He is my favorite of all of the English saints. He's wonderful, wonderful man. Yeah. Stood firm when every other bishop collapsed.
Yeah, he's a great saint. Great writer, great spiritual leader, and then to think of what happened to him.
Scholar, friend of Erasmus.
Yep. But there you are, and you both remained faithful in your faiths, going to each other's churches for a time?
You know, I sometimes, looking back on it, Marcus, I think maybe it was providential that I had trouble with overcoming my, as it turns out, vincible ignorance. Because for years we went to each other's churches every Sunday. We both went to both churches. And we spent quite a bit of time in church, as you can tell, especially when we had children. That was, we did it. And the reason why was because we were deeply committed to the Christian faith, and we were also concerned about what was going on in our churches. The irony was that as the Episcopalian Church, the Anglican Church that I went to, it was a high church Anglican parish that had all the incense and smoke and bells and vestments and beautiful language and so on, and chant. But the church that Jim went to, our parish church, while the Catholic Church was not selling the faith down the river, it was destroying the liturgy. It was absurd. Yeah. We used to have these conversations sometimes. We would exchange atrocity stories, you might say. Your church did, haha, it was yours this time, and So it was probably, it gave him an insight too. He wrote a book in the early 1970s called The Recovery of the Sacred, because the Catholic liturgy had been so undermined by the changes following the council, misguided implementation.
Not the council themselves.
Not the council itself.
Right.
The misguided people who were promoting their own ideas of what the council, their own interpretation of the council. And so much had changed that that even though the core was there, the teaching was there, the practice was all over the place. Meanwhile, in the Anglican Church, where we had this beautiful, it was almost like a, you found on a beach a beautiful shell that has got incredible colors in the shell, but it's empty. Whatever was in it is no longer there. And that began to appear more and more something that you could no longer ignore. And in the Episcopal Church, well, in the same General Convention, by the vote of the General Convention, eliminated the 450-year-old prayer book, the classic language of the Book of Common Prayer. At the same convention, they accepted ordination of women, and one of the women they accepted her ordination was a lesbian. And at the same convention, they accepted abortion. And that was stunning for many, many, many people. And there was an effort to try and recoup with a smaller group and to had a continuing Anglican Church. George Rutler was part of that movement, as was I. But that came apart for various reasons.
That's kind of a negative nudge towards the Catholic Church, and not everyone that went through the negatives of that ended up Catholic, because, again, you mentioned the issue of this Holy Father. So, but that was the nudge, because up until then you really never considered becoming Catholic, even though your husband was Catholic. You're both respected. Were you?
Right.
This was a nudge, right? That the main.
Well, that was actually it was more than a nudge. It was. It's all over. If that can happen, then there is no magisterial truth in the Anglican Church. Now, Anglicans had been very careful to maintain that they had apostolic succession, all of this kind of thing. That was something we thought we were Catholics. But if that could happen, that couldn't be true. Meanwhile, the terrible liturgies that were singing goofy songs and, drum rolls and, just nutso stuff going on in the Catholic liturgies. But after Paul VI died and John Paul I, they elected this incredible scholar whose field was precisely put its finger on the most sensitive point in our entire culture, and that is the relationship of human beings with each other and with God. And I thought, that is amazing. It is amazing. It's an amazing sign that the Holy Spirit really is with the Catholic Church. All of the Protestant churches had pretty much tanked. I mean, that doesn't mean there weren't believers in them. Right. But the structures were either under fire, some of them are still valiantly struggling on, but that the Catholic Church had this gift of maintaining sound teaching, orthodoxy. It was, you could see that this task was still there.
Sometimes when I've talked to Anglican Episcopal converts to the church who always thought of themselves as Catholic, that they almost expressed like becoming a Catholic was like, well, it's like stepping over a pond. It was like no big deal. But, I mean, really, there are barriers you have to work through on certain dogma, understanding of where you are in terms of who you are in the church, especially as a woman coming from Anglicanism to the Catholic Church.
That's one of the problems, I think, with the whole Protestant thing, is that you have to be convinced. You can't accept it on someone else's authority. You have to be convinced personally. So you are going to have a little dilemma there. I took very seriously the vows that I made at my marriage. And I raised my children Catholic, even if it meant, which it often did, that I have to check their catechisms and make sure Catholic teaching is in there. And see to it that it did, or ask for corrections and, call somebody's attention to it. Because that's what I said I would do. And I think you're obliged to do what you say you would do. But beyond that, I think that probably too. I mean, also I had a very, nice neighbors and some Catholic friends that were good and that helped me along with living in that that kind of.
Well, I was thinking also in the midst of the experimentation in the liturgy, there's also the difference in how we Catholics understand the real presence than even in the way you understood it in a high church Anglican. I mean, there was a distinctive difference there. Pretty
much, although I came to accept the Catholic teaching on transubstantiation before I became a Catholic. There were no I had no problems with any of the Catholic dogmas, even the Marian dogmas, which a lot of Protestants have. I had come to understand how this made sense. But I did it on my own. See, it was my own mind that made sense. It made sense to. It wasn't that I was accepting the authority of someone else to tell me. That was the stumbling block. Was the authority, and that was something that it took 18 years to get over.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, talk briefly also about both the two foci of your the women's movement as well as Adoremus, and then we'll take some questions. Back in a moment. Hello, welcome back to the Journey Home. Our guest is Helen Hitchcock. We've got a number of emails, phone calls, but before we go there, I want you to say a little bit of about both the women's work that you're doing and Adoremus.
In 25 words or less,
yes,
right? Yeah,
exactly.
okay, right.
I mean, why were they so important for you?
Well, I'll tell you,
Women
for Faith and Family was I'll take you back to the mid-1980s. And I had been writing for some years for the National Catholic Register under my maiden name. I was not a Catholic at the time, but I thought it was, but but I was writing a regular column for them, and they used to send me books to review. And they sent me all the feminist stuff. Now, I didn't review all the feminist books, Marcus, but I did read them.
You didn't just burn them all? No.
Well, this had afflicted all of the Protestant churches. Everyone, it was undermined. It was just a. Yeah. So then in early 1984, I learned that the bishops had decided that they were going to write a pastoral letter on women's concerns and some of the things that they had on the agenda, and I saw the list of consultors that they had on that they had appointed to advise the bishops, and they were some of the same feminist women who'd written these terrible tracts. Oh no! I've been through that in the Protestant church. This can't happen in the Catholic Church. That is too much. I've got to alert people to this. So I actually did. I told my husband, "Oh my gosh, look at this," and he said, "Oh, that's really bad." So we got finally. One thing didn't lead to another, and it finally was kind of one of those things where, okay, it's up to you. And my husband was out of town, kids were in bed. I thought, I'll hammer out something ecumenical, because all the churches were having problems with this feminist attack on the core of the faith. Right. Not just ordination, but the real meaning of the
Trinity.
Christian faith, the Trinity, everything. Yeah. So I thought, it has to be women to address this, because the problem is caused by women, and men, no matter how smart they are, will be marginalized. Yeah. You're just a man, you can't tell us anything. It has to be women. It has to be women who are convinced of their faith. And I knew some Catholic women who'd been active in the pro-life movement. So I contacted some of these women and said, you got to do something. This is really tough. So anyway, he's gone, I'm typing, and I realize as I'm typing what turned out to be the Affirmation for Catholic Women, which is still in circulation, that I couldn't make a single statement of faith on my own authority. It just wouldn't go. And I thought, that's it. That's why the church has authority, has temporal authority. That's why the Holy Spirit has given that role to the church, so that throughout time there will be an ability to resource, to get back to the source, and that the truth will be maintained, that the straight faith will be, there will be a straight line through history, through the church. I got it, but I thought, oh gosh, how could it have taken so long? So it was really kind of embarrassing.
But it's interesting, though, that it was your drive for addressing these difficult contemporary issues that really was kind of the last step in to understand the importance of the church. And you had the straight line of the trusting of the church for 2,000 years on these issues of the human person. Now, what about the liturgy?
Well, that was a chief objective of the feminist movement, was to change. They wanted to destroy the church the way it was. They believed that the church was a social construct made up by men for males to keep women down, and they wanted to change it radically. And the only way they could do that was to work from within and to change the way she spoke the truth, change the way her practices, the liturgy, the motions that we make at church, the everything. So that's how it started, was through the incursion of feminist language, so-called inclusive language. Right. And I did a book on that in 1992, a collection of articles on that. And that's one thing led to another.
Well, there we have Adoremus. Let's take our first caller, Armin from New York. Hello, what's your question?
Yes, how are you? If anybody has read Sacrosanctum Concilium, we obviously know that the Mass that we have now in Catholic churches is not reflected by that document. Now with Pope Benedict XVI, what do we envision as perhaps a new missal coming out, a new liturgy, or will it be an amalgamation of the present liturgy and the old Tridentine Mass?
Thank you.
Well, we actually just have a new missal that was published, I think, released in 2002 under Pope John Paul the Second. It's now being translated, and that's one of the things that we're going to be watching very carefully. And for you Catholics who have been watching the liturgy for the last 10 years, you will be familiar with the translation problem. For those of you who are not so much interested in it, I would just say this one thing, that the reason why the translation is important is because the church transmits the truth through words. And if you change the words, you can often change the meaning. And when you change the meaning, then the church is no longer, she's tongue-tied. So that's one reason why this translation thing is so important, and why we stress out about it so much. But as far as what Pope Benedict will do, he's written several books on the liturgy. He makes it clear what his view is, that the liturgical reform got off track, badly needs to get back on track, and I think we're making some real progress in that direction, but it would be very difficult to put back together something that has been 40 years in the breaking.
And sometimes that means rebuilding trust in leadership. When
you've got a broken building, you start finding the stones to build it back with.
That's right.
So we're doing that. I think that is happening, but it's not going to happen overnight, I don't think.
We have an email from Tom in Wisconsin. Greetings, Helen Hitchcock. I am a lifelong Catholic who has been growing both in knowledge and practice of devotions, especially now that I am a father. Devotions help me to live life more fully. It seems that church devotions are less significant today. As a former Episcopalian and now Catholic for 20 plus years, do you notice a similar trend?
Well, yeah, I do. My children, when I was raising my children, it began to be extremely important. The most important thing was to help to form their faith in the best way that I knew how. In a way, you might say that what got me involved in all this feminist stuff was not a lust for battle. I would rather do anything than engage in conflict. But if you're messing with my kids, you're messing with Mama Bear. And so people will do all kinds of unusual things if their children's lives and eternal lives are at stake. And I think that that's required of all parents. I don't know if that answers the question, but...
Well, this question of the place of devotions, even in the liturgy, I know has come under attack and changed over the last 20 years. I know that, you know, one of the churches I attended, all of a sudden all the Marian hymns were pulled out and anything that was devotional was pulled out. And to me, it was a misunderstanding of even some of why we do some of our great feasts. So, and rather than correcting misunderstandings that had risen with good catechesis, well, just throw it out.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate thing, and we're stuck with that situation. One of the things that has been extremely popular on our Women for Faith and Family website, that was an outgrowth of something that we had done in print, was a liturgical calendar. People need to have information about the liturgical year, why it's important, and information about various saints and feasts of the church. So we put information about that up, and when it's a holiday that we think can be, you know, a big holiday that is especially important for a family to use, we have suggestions all the way down to recipes. So that's one thing that can be done. But as far as devotions are concerned, I've been really pleased in the last 5 or 6 years to see an increase of interest in Eucharistic devotions. About 3 or 4 years ago, I had 2 calls in 1 week to Adoremus from young pastors who wanted to start Eucharistic adoration, but they had no experience of it themselves, either when they were growing up or in seminary. And while they could conduct it with using the books, their people weren't familiar with it either. So I thought 2 calls in 1 week, it would be so easy. I could just do a little booklet about this. Well, then I sent the little booklet to the Archbishop and said, what do you think of this? And he had several suggestions to make. So we finally put together this booklet, and we've given away more than 100,000 of those booklets. And that's just by people finding out about it and writing in and asking for some. That means that people are on their knees in front of the Blessed Sacrament now more than they ever were in the preceding 10 years. And a lot of bishops have caught on to this too and are having Corpus Christi processions and much more devotion to the Eucharist. And that is a real joy to see and a very, very positive sign, because the more you pray in front of Jesus, the more you're connected with
the closer you be to him, and then the more you be like him.
Yeah.
Let's take our next caller, Jean from Illinois. Hello, what's your question?
Hi, how are you?
Good.
First off, I love going to church. My daughter is 19 years old, does not like going to the Catholic Church. She met somebody who said, come with me to a Baptist church, and she likes going there. She's involved in a Bible study. I just want to know, is that okay that I'm letting her go? But I told her, I said, you could go there, but please come back to the Catholic Church eventually. Sometime come back. Am I doing the right thing? Or should I insist that she goes to church with us and stays in the Catholic Church?
Thank you, Jean. I'll tell you what, our prayers are with you and all you other parents out there that are struggling with similar issues.
There are many, many, many parents who are struggling with issues like that. It depends, in your situation, it would depend, I think, on a lot of factors, and you're the only one who can really make the decision what's your best action in that. Many mothers would be so pleased that their daughter wants to go to anything religious instead of hanging out at the bar and not ever going to church, that they would almost envy you that you've got this kind of problem. But I understand what you mean, because there is a seduction of the spirit that you are concerned about. But she knows where you are, and you can keep praying, and pray that what she learns, if she goes to these Baptist Bible studies, that what she learns will be authentic and true, and I think if you pray that way, that your prayers will be answered.
You know, I remember when I was a pastor, I recognized that we were called to evangelize. Go ye therefore and make disciples of all nations. But we also recognized at the same time that we had to examine what we're bringing them back to. Mm-hmm. So you have to have renewal. There has to be renewal going on at the same time you're evangelizing. And sometimes you almost hate to go out and evangelize because we have so much renewal to do. Okay, so you're kind of stuck there. And so part of the struggle is, you know, if our young people are turned off by what they're experiencing at the local level in our parish, what do we do to address that issue? And sadly, many of the modern answers are completely wrong.
Yeah, unfortunately.
You know, to compromise, to change things, to focus on trying to attract them.
Yeah, unfortunately, the thing is that, and it doesn't, I mean, it may work temporarily, but the things that are, when you change, let's say, the worship of your parish, the style of worship to appeal to, let's say, teenagers, does that mean that you're going to have different styles for each group that you've got, and that there is no unity, and that there's nothing that the liturgy should transcend all of those little special interests that we have? If we're interested in jazz or rock music, where there's a place for those interests, but it's not a church. The worship of the church, the beauty of the music, the sacred, transcendent beauty of the music should echo and uplift the truth that we hear in the words of the liturgy and in the sacramental action. And the same with the art and the architecture. Beauty needs to surround truth in order to make it more compelling and more attractive to all of us.
And again, back to the issue of authority, to be the ones to decide what's appropriate in music, what's appropriate in the liturgy, what's appropriate in art, as opposed to each one of us kind of deciding what we like at our local place and running with it, you know, or letting the little music group, they're the one group that volunteered to do the music, so there they are, but don't give them the authority to decide what's going to shape the entire liturgy. I mean, that's got it all backwards.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's take this email from Larry in Texas. He writes, "Dear Mrs. Hitchcock, having viewed your Adoremus website and newsletter, it's clear that you are committed to reviving, quote, old practices. I believe you feel that bygone ways are somehow, quote, more reverent, which I do not understand. I am led to ask, why are you so concerned about these things? This seems to be a clear area where the clergy ought to be in charge." Now, first of all, would you say that Adoremus and the newsletter and the website are all about reviving old practices?
No, but I think probably the reason why he may get that impression is because we have said that we need to go back to the council document, read them correctly. We've published excerpts from Cardinal Ratzinger, then Cardinal Ratzinger, now Pope Benedict. It may be that gives the impression that we want to go back to something. We do want to go back to the council and look at what we've done, evaluate what we've done, and renew the reform. So that may be what gives them the idea of that. But actually, when you talk about renewing, we were talking about this earlier. When you talk about renewing, it doesn't mean making it absolutely new. What it means is to reestablish a connection with, or to learn to cherish something in a more deep and intense way. The same with active participation. That is, the actual words are actual participation, which means that people should be participating mentally, but spiritually, and not necessarily being active in the sense that we Americans sometimes consider it. So renewal is what we're really trying to do here, in that sense of renewal.
I wish I had the documents in front of me, because I'm pretty sure that one of the earliest footnotes in the documents confirms the fact that what's happening is being built on the foundation of what was in the past.
That's clear. That's clear throughout the document, and in everything that
It's not a throwing out and a starting from scratch.
No, that wasn't the idea at
Right.
all.
Right.
What it was that, and few people remember this anymore because we're all, but before the council, the ordinary people didn't really have much connection with sacramental action that was going on. And back as early as Pius X, Pius X wanted to reestablish the people's engagement with, or involvement with, spiritual involvement with the liturgy. And he's the one who invented the term actual participation. And this was what the council was trying to do after another 60 years, after Pius X, was to bring that into focus and to have Catholics being more engaged with their faith. To love it more and to want to give it more.
All right, let's and people took those words and then made them say what they wanted them to say. That's part of the problem.
One of the problems.
Rather than, so a renewing is going back to understand what did the Council Fathers intend, guided by the Spirit.
And what does the Church, what's consistent with the Church teaching?
Yeah. Let's go to Charlotte in Ohio. Hello, what's your question for us?
Good evening. Thanks for taking my question. I am a 55-year-old Cradle Catholic. Grew up in a mixed marriage home, but my father was very committed to seeing that we were raised Catholic, and he later turned Catholic. There weren't a lot of devotions in the home, I think, for that reason. But at any rate, Catholic school from kindergarten clear through nursing school. Kind of passively but deliberately walked away from the church about 5 years ago, right around the time my life fell apart for a lot of reasons. And I am now in 12-step recovery, and things are better. And I find that that program has given me a spirituality that I didn't have before. I used to think that the church demanded perfection first, and then you could approach God. I don't know where I got that perception, but that's where I got it. And I feel myself drawn back to the church. I'm working in an office with 2 other women of similar age who are Catholic, and one very devout, and really an example, and there's a lot of lively conversation. I don't want to be a cafeteria Catholic, but...
Oh, okay. What can we do to help her back?
You know, I just want to make a personal aside here. I think I'm glad that you've got those co-workers. I worked with some Catholic people too, and they were important. I don't think that Catholics may really realize how important their witness as Catholics is to other people who are not. And I think that I mean, I went to participated in Good Friday services with my Catholic girlfriend at work, for example. I was not a Catholic. I was glad to be included in that, but I think that Catholics ought to remember that they may be the only person that someone that you encounter will ever meet who can tell them or can encourage them in their Catholic faith. So that's the aside, the parenthesis. Just to you, please come back. There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of labor that needs to be done in the vineyards. I hope that you will strengthen your faith, and as soon as you're ready, come on in. We need you.
Oh, yeah. All right. And I think I was thinking about, which you've mentioned in this program many times, is that we know in our own lives that sometimes the reason that God allows us through certain experiences so that we can be of comfort to others in those experiences.
Well,
and
that's true,
and
yes.
you've come through some difficult times that are like a lot of other people. And God has touched your heart through the witness of your friends and your own, and you have something to share. You have a part of the witness of Christ that is unique to you. And so come back to the church and experience the blessings of the sacrament. Read the Catechism, other great books, and watch EWTN, other things that can help you understand your faith. Yeah.
I think one thing all of us need to remind ourselves, and that is that God called us into being right now for some particular reason. He didn't call us into being in another time when it might have been more pleasant or more convenient, that we might have picked ourselves. He called us into being now to serve Him now. And that, I think, is something that we need to remind ourselves of.
Let's take this email from Kristen. I was raised Episcopalian, but converted to the Catholic Church. My parents are still Episcopalian and will be traveling home this summer. I plan to attend a Catholic Mass every Saturday night so that I can still attend my parents' Mass with them. I know I am not supposed to receive communion anymore at the Episcopal Church, yet I still don't fully know why. Also, how can I help my parents understand? Thanks, Kristen, for your email.
That's a tough one, and I've been there. I, of course, did not receive communion at my parents' church when they had it, when I visited them, but I did the same thing that you're doing. I went to church with them at their church. I went to church, Catholic church, either at 7 in the morning or the night before so that I could still go to church with them. And I thought that that was important for them as well as for me to maintain our unity in the body of Christ. I think in a way that's ecumenism in a good sense. The reason why we don't receive communion in each other's churches is because the understanding, what the Catholic understanding of this happens at that sacrament is not the same. And for us to participate in a symbolic exercise would not be to express the truth. And yet that true sacrament only exists in the Catholic Church and in the Orthodox. So that's the reason for that. But I understand fully what you're going through. I've been there.
Well, we've got a lot of fine phone calls and emails, and time is always an issue. Let's see if we can take this email quickly. Thank you, Sydney. Sydney writes, Helen, I see feminism as being the reigning ethos in most colleges and universities, including in not accepting Catholic schools. Do you agree? And if so, do you think the American Catholic Church understands the depth of the problem and is prepared to address it?
I agree with you fully. You just have to look around and see those terrible V monologues that are, it's an assault on the Catholic campuses and on Catholic womanhood and on Catholic teaching, on basic Christian teaching, and this is just a travesty. And that it's tolerated in Catholic universities is beyond describing. That's one symbolic sign of the influence of this alien ideology, feminism and the related isms, that we're undergoing, and that the assault continues. And we're simply going to have to continue to stay in there and fight that. I mean, much as we don't like combat. As far as the, there was a the
American Church, does it recognize?
Is it aware and will it do anything about it? Well, I think to some extent it is more, there is a growing awareness. But doing something about it sometimes requires sacrifices on the part of the authorities that, for example, a leader of a Catholic university recently who said that he was going to think about it, maybe he was going to change things, changed his mind and went along with the game. In that particular case, his bishop came right in and said, it's time for us to do something about this. I'm very disappointed with the way the president handled this. So this is going to be something that we're going to have to stick in there. We're going to have to support the church leaders who are doing the right thing and pray for the ones who are not.
Yeah. Let's say that there's some folk watching the program who are right now where you were before you were open to the church. What would you like, maybe in closing, to tell them, to encourage them to make the same journey home that you made?
If they were at the same point that I was, well, there are a lot of chapters of the Bible that I might suggest that they read. But sincerely pray where God is leading you, where He needs you, where you need to do the best work to build up the body of Christ in the world, and ask for an answer that you can understand.
Because there's a cacophony of voices out there, isn't there, today?
Indeed there is, yes. But if you pray for something like that, I think your prayers will be answered.
And I think one of the keys you said earlier is that one way you cut through all these voices that are conflicting is where is the authority that can help you discern through all the opinions to know which of these is true that you can really rest your life on.
There is a rock,
Yeah.
and that rock is the rock on which Christ built the church. The rock is called Peter, and there it is.
Helen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the journey home and for your witness, both in your women's movement and in the Adoremus. All right? And thank you for joining us. I hope this has been encouragement to you. Go to Helen Hitchcock's websites. Check out what she's doing and get involved. Let your name and your voice be heard. God bless you.